You're welcome. Good morning. It's time for us to begin. We're in Daniel chapter 8. Towards the end of the chapter, we'll begin reading in verse 18 in just a moment. We talked about this section last week a fair amount, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up with it today and talk more about the historical outcome of these prophecies today as well. So I hope you have done your study on this, and we'll get to a good discussion here shortly. Before we begin, let's start with a word of prayer. Our wonderful, merciful Father, thank you so much for today, for giving us breath and the opportunity to serve you and to be a light to this community. Father, help us to keep our lives in focus, to be focused on you and to be challenging ourselves to grow to be more like you and your Son and your Spirit. Father, as we study Daniel and we see the prophecies of restoration and the prophecies of your kingdom that is to come, help us to find confidence and courage and hope in the words that we study. That in all things, Father, we would see your faithfulness and steadfast love. Thank you, Father, for your Son and for the hope that comes in being in your family. And this we pray in your Son, our Savior's name. Amen. All right, Daniel chapter 8, picking up in verse 18. We talked about this a fair amount last week, but we'll go ahead and make sure it's fresh in our mind, maybe go over some details that we need to go over, answer some questions, and then we'll get into seeing how this all plays out in history. So confirming these details actually happen or not. Beginning in verse 18. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. All right, so take a moment, reflect on those things, mark any questions or observations, and then we'll talk about it. All right. What do you notice, or what questions do you have? Gary has something to offer us.
Well, I just wonder, it mentions the kings of Media and Persia and Greece. I just wonder, why doesn't it mention all the other kings that are brought up?
Yeah, and I think part of what's happening here is he's in part, he's highlighting specific kings that are key markers in what is going to happen. So why not all the kings and all the different ones, even within Media and Persia and within Greece? The answer is because that's not the point. He's trying to point out that he's prophesying with great accuracy what is to come. Why does he not include Babylon and Rome and all these others? Because that's not his focus. His focus, as we talked about last week, is that it is for the time of the end, which he says, where does he said that? Verse 17, everyone's helping me out. Thank you. For the vision is for the time of the end. And part of what we're going to try to figure out is, what is this time of the end? And I made the point last week, this is not referencing the Messiah coming. This is not pointing to the very end times. There's something else happening that he's talking about, and it's the time of the end of something else. Ida has something to offer.
So I just thought it was interesting that he has all these things he's going to do. He's going to cause fearful destruction. He's cunning, et cetera, et cetera. But he doesn't have control, because there's 2 times that it's mentioned. Well, one, it's not by his own power that he's doing this, and the other, by no. And then when he dies, or is taken out, let's say that, it's not by a human hand.
Good. Yeah, so we notice there in verse 24, this is not by his own hand. He shall become great, but it's not by his own hand. And he shall be broken, verse 25. He shall be broken, but by no human hand. Again, as we've talked through this vision, we're seeing that the vision is pointing to a power beyond what these goat and ram represent. There's something greater at play that's orchestrating this. All right, what else do we see? We'll get into the historical side in a minute. But what else do you see in the text? Go ahead.
Verse 23, I don't know if this has already been talked about, but when it says when the transgressors have reached their limit, does that just mean when God's lost patience with them?
It could mean that when God has lost patience with them. It could mean that when they've reached the limit of their ability to have power and control, and they're just, maybe it's the end of their life. But what it does highlight is there's a limit to their power and their control over the earth. So I think at minimum, whether it's some nuance, how we nuance that is open to interpretation, but certainly they're limited. They're gonna reach their limit at some point. Okay, anything else? All right, questions might come up. Let's get into the historical side of this. This gets really interesting as you walk through this. So, I'm sorry, before we do that, verse 27. What is Daniel's outcome here? What's the outcome of him, even after he sees the vision, then the vision is, quote unquote, interpreted, and then what happens to Daniel? He's sick. This has got him doubled over, and he is sick to his stomach. He's laying sick for some days, and I still don't understand it. Even when it was explained, this is the Medes and the Persians, and this is the Greeks. Well, at this time, the Medes and Persians, yeah, they're kind of a nation off to the east, and they kind of got their own place, but they are nothing in comparison to Babylon. And Greece? Oh, they're just some measly little group over there that's across the Mediterranean Sea. They're nothing. So what do you mean they're going to conquer? What do you mean they're going to be doing something powerful? Daniel can't figure it out. And it wouldn't be until the many days from now that it becomes clear what God was exactly referring to. All right, so going into the ram and the goat, here you have a artist's rendering of what that may have looked like over the Ulai Canal. You have the ram on the left, grounded and firm, and he's got his double horns ready for battle. And here comes that flying goat with his single horn coming in and attacking him. And he wins. I mean, you look at the stoutness of the ram and then the leanness of that goat. Who's supposed to win? The ram. Everything about this prophecy defies anything that we would understand about the kingdom of animals. That this is not how the victory should happen. So let's talk about the ram first. One of the first things we get is that he has two horns. We've mentioned even this morning, and that was in verse 3, and Gary brought us to verse 20 this morning. So who are these two horns? What do you got in verse 20? Who are the two horns? Medes and Persians. Everyone's mouthing it but not saying it. I'll help you out. The Medes and the Persians in verse 20. Now what gets really interesting, if you have not looked at history before, is that in verse 3 it says that one was higher and one came later and yet grew bigger. And so what we actually see is that the Medes were dominant to begin with. They were the ones that were leading the charge and creating a nation and becoming this powerhouse. But then the Persians become greater under Cyrus the Great around 559, and they reign till about 530 BC. And so they become the greater of the two, but they work almost as a unified force. The Medes and the Persians become allies and work through this, through the lands and take control. They pushed west, north, and south. Well, we'll look at a map in a moment. But as they pushed west in 546 BC, they conquered Lydia. And then eventually they would conquer Babylon in about 539 BC. Well, we know that would happen. We see the fall of Babylon. And then we have to the north, Armenia and Scythia. And then to the south, and this was considered the south, even though it's almost west, but it was considered the south of the land. The queen of the south comes up to Solomon to look into his wisdom, and so that's Egypt. In 525 BC, they conquer Egypt. All right, let's look at a map of that. So here's the Medes over here, and then Persia comes up and helps become the powerhouse. They push out to the east and conquer Babylon, and they conquer Lydia. So 547 BC, 539 BC. Now, the north isn't captured in this, but the north that they're referring to is this section along the mountains between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That becomes part of their conquering to the north. And then finally, off to the bottom left of the screen, we have Egypt. And it's conquered by Cyrus's son Cambyses in 525 BC. So we see how the smaller, or the latter horn grows up and it becomes the greater and creates this conquering. All right, what else do you notice about the ram at that point? Or what questions or what other details did you find as you were looking and studying through the fulfillment of the ram? I know some of you like to dig into history more than I do. I'll dig enough to get us the basics, I promise. Okay? I think what becomes really interesting is the next half of the story, is the goat. The goat becomes really interesting and seeing all of the details and how they play out in history. Because you got to remember that this was given to Daniel in roughly 547 BC. Okay? About 547 BC is when all this is given to him. and the conquerings happen shortly after that. The goat, though, has this conspicuous horn between his eyes in verse 5. Of course, we know that this goat is Greece, but who is this ram, or the horn? What is this horn that represents a king? Who was the great king of Greece to begin with, or the great conqueror of Greece? Anyone know? Alexander the Great. Yeah. And so Alexander the Great becomes powerful and is from 336 to 323 BC. And it's incredible because part of what this narrative captures is that he is going with powerful wrath and he's enraged in verse 6 and 7. Does anyone know why Alexander the Great would be enraged and have powerful wrath against the Medes and the Persians? Ida?
Because the Persians came and pretty much pillaged Greece, destroyed Athens, did horrible things, and so he wanted revenge.
Yeah. And so what happens is he sees what damage they've done to his homeland and his home culture, and he's wanting revenge. He's wanting to get out there and beat them down and leaves them trampled. He tramples them down, it says in the prophecy. And he does this by conquering them through three major battles. I don't have them up here, but there's three battles that take place over the next, from 304 BC to 331 BC. And in fact, it's that last battle where he defeats Darius III in the Battle of Gaugamela. Don't hold me to that pronunciation. But yeah, Alexander the Great's anger toward the Medes and Persians stemmed from a number of factors, including historical grievances, political motivations, and personal experiences. And he explicitly framed his campaign as a war of revenge for the Persian invasions of Greece that happened centuries prior. It wasn't a recent invasion. It had happened when he was younger, and now or before his time, and he comes up and he's gonna get him back. He's going to win. And he was seeking to liberate Greek cities from under Persian rule and then acquire that vast wealth that Persia had built up. And what is the phrase that talks about how successful he is? Do you remember from the prophecy? No one could rescue from his power. And yet, verse 8 says that the goat became exceedingly great, but he was strong, and the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. That great horn was broken. What happens to Alexander the Great? Gail? Yeah, he gets sick and died at the age of 32, unexpectedly. Yeah. Now, there's some debate over what actually happened to him, but it was a very quick loss of life in 323 BC. So he dies at the age of 32 at the height of his power. He's gone. And then as Gail pointed out, the four horns come along, verse 8. Who are these four horns? Anyone look it up? How does this come true? I'm going to let y'all say the names if you looked them up. That's all I'm trying to do here. Ida's going to be brave for us. Oh, and then Lisa, if not. Lisa, go ahead, she says.
I read, but that doesn't mean I can pronounce the names.
Yeah.
It went to the four generals, Ptolemy, and he ruled Egypt. Seleucus Nicator, who ruled the Seleucid from Asia Minor to the Indus River. Antigonus of he ruled Macedonia, and Lysimachus,
Yeah,
who was Thrace.
good.
And later it went on to the Seleucids of Syria.
So we'll go on to the little horn that comes out in a minute. But here's the the empire that divides. I had them in a different order, but here are the four. Cassander, who takes Macedonia and Greece. We have Lysimachus, who takes Thrace and Asia Minor. We have Ptolemy of Soter, and he takes Egypt and Palestine, raising up the Ptolemaic Empire. And then Seleucus, who takes Syria, Babylon, and Persia. And so we see that these four horns come up, and they divide the kingdom up, and they never become as great as Alexander the Great. They never have his full power. They never rise up and become as grand and as powerful and mighty and glorious as Alexander did. You can see why Daniel would be sitting at the end of this and going, I still don't understand. And part of the problem we talked about last time, part of the problem why he doesn't understand is this prophecy is talking about a time where the temple seems to be under the control of the people, and yet it gets conquered by an outside enemy and gets destroyed and trampled and then gets restored. Well, at the time of this prophecy, the temple is not being worshipped in. The temple is not under the control of the Jews. It's under the control of Babylon. And so add a layer to this, Daniel's totally confused. What do you mean there's going to come a time to the end of the persecution? It hasn't even been, it's already dead. We don't have it. There's not a glorious time that it's going to be destroyed. And so there's just so many layers to why Daniel would not be able to quickly understand this. All right? And then we have the little horn. Verse 9. That this little horn comes up. And I think Miss Kay had mentioned a name last time, but who is this little horn? Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth. And he is from 175 to 164 BC. And he comes out of that last empire. So he is of the Seleucus-Nicator Empire, and he becomes this powerhouse that rises up and grows to the land, toward the glorious land. And of course, we talked about that glorious land being Judah. He goes in and conquers down into Judah again. He goes in and destroys. Now, what's happened before that takes place? Well, before the end of Daniel, we're going to learn that the people start going back. The Israelites go back to the promised land. They're enjoying the benefits of being back in Jerusalem. And then here comes Greece hundreds of years later, and he starts conquering it again. He comes in and conquers them, and it says that he goes in. We're going to take a look at this invasion of Judah then, that as he comes toward that glorious land, that he desecrates the temple in 167 BC. Or about 167. So he starts conquering in 175, rises up, goes into Judea about 167 BC. And it says in the Maccabees that he sacrifices pigs in the temple. That is a total desecration of the Jewish temple. Those were unclean animals, unfit to be sacrifices. And what is this guy doing? He's coming in and sacrificing pig blood everywhere. The temple is completely ruined. Even to the point that he outlaws the Jewish practices of circumcision, the Sabbath, and temple worship. And we even see in the text that it says he cast down some of the host of heaven and trampled them in verse 10. And what does Antiochus do? Well, he massacres and tortures many faithful Jews, as we see in verse 24 through 25. This is the, as we read in verse, I forgot the term he uses in this version, verse 19. Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. This is the indignation. This is what happens at the end of all of this. That this destruction and this desecration of the temple and of their identity as a Jewish people, it comes to a head in this way. And it's overwhelming. They lose access to their hope. Okay, what do you notice up to this point? Any questions at this point? Okay, so these angelic beings in the middle of this dream, as this is being represented, what do they ask? In chapter 8, verse 13 and 14, what do these angelic beings ask? How long? How long is this going to take place? How long is Antiochus going to be allowed to continue to do this thing? How long? And what's the answer? 2,300 evenings and mornings. 2,300 evenings and mornings. Now, we talked last time that this could literally be, if you are talking 2,300 days, it'd be about 6 years and 3 months. It would seem to me, though, that the 2,300 evenings and mornings refers to 2,300 morning and evening sacrifices total. So now we divide that 2,300 in half, and you're left with 1,150 days, or about 3.2 years. All right, so we're at about 3 years and a little bit more is what this 2,300 evenings and mornings does. Hold on to that number. Because what happens next in the history of Antiochus? What happens next in the history of the Jews? There's a big revolt. Do you remember the name of the revolt? What is it? The Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt, where Judas Maccabeus and Jewish rebels recapture Jerusalem. They go back into the city and reclaim the temple. And the temple is rededicated on the 25th of Kislev, 164 BC. And what do they do in commemoration of the fact that they go back in and reclaim their temple? What feast and what celebration do they institute? Hanukkah. This is the origin of Hanukkah. Now, what do you notice between when he comes in and desecrates the temple and when they come back and rededicate worship? It's about 3.2 years. Almost to the day. So what is this prophecy when it says that this refers to the time of the end? What is it the end of? The indignation. More specifically, the loss of temple worship. The conquering of the temple, the desecration of the temple. When will this all end? When will we have our temple back? When will we be able to worship our God and offer sacrifices? When will we have a relationship with God again? At the time of the end. Steve, you've been patient. You had a question or comment? Well, I'll get a microphone to you. Hang on, let's get a microphone.
Yeah, apologies, but let's see. I'm trying to place this just to help me get oriented with the reign of Tobias, or who was the last king who tore his robes and everything when they found oh man, does that make sense?
As I said, I'm not a history buff. The
Oh,
name
right.
Tobias does not ring a bell to me. Does anyone else know?
King before. I was unprepared to follow too many different strains. I just that I, 100 and something with the conqueror guy, and later, and the Tobias people were later. And I just remember him. The king of Israel, the last real one, whose reign was over included the two Benjamin and Joshua's members, and he was the king was 8 years old. I have a problem with my one symptom of my disease is I don't remember some things I used to remember. And so anyway, this 8-year-old kid, the king of the southern tribes of Jewish people, they were so alarmed at how far they deviated from the law, which is still in effect because they still think they're a nation. And after the 37, I'm quiet, but any sense at all?
So, okay, so Tobias, if I'm looking up quickly, unless someone else has better information, was centuries earlier. So he was around 8th century BC, whereas we'd be closer to like the 2nd century here. So he's 500, 600 years before. Yep. Yeah, similarities in terms of reaction to what takes place, but yeah, centuries apart. Yep, doesn't seem to be any connection to it. So, all right, what else do we notice then as you look at how this plays out and you look at Daniel chapter 8? What else do you notice, or what then makes sense to you, or questions do you have with the text? Lisa.
It says my version says he'll be broken, but not with human hands. Not by human hands. He'll be broken, but not by human hands.
So, Antiochus.
Yeah, and he died of an illness or a disease as well.
Okay, so he loses his power by illness or sickness and dies from that. And clearly this is not the end of his power when the Maccabean revolt happens. They just regain access to the temple and restore the holiness of the temple. And so then later he would die from other causes. Ida has something for
us. This is just a side note, but some people might find this interesting. This is where the relations between the Samaritans and the Jews gets really bad, because the Samaritans allied with the Greeks.
Okay. All right. So this is also the root of the Samaritan divide between the Jews and the Samaritans, because they allied with the Greeks. Interesting. So, you're Daniel. You're in captivity. You've been there for, I don't know, nearly 60 years. And you get this vision. You don't know what it means yet. And it's not going to happen for another close to 400 years before the fulfillment of all of it happens. Can you understand the confusion? What does this mean? I don't get it. And so what is he told? Seal it up. Tuck it away. It's not meant to be fully understood right now. You're not going to understand all the details. There's more to come. There's something else here that needs to be understood. But it won't make sense until it's fulfilled. Now we get the pleasure of seeing the fulfillment of that. So hopefully some of that walkthrough helps to clarify. What else do we, Ida has something? You're fine.
I can't help but think that Daniel, after 60 years of captivity, waiting for the time of where they will be allowed to go back to the land, and in the future, there's going to be more. There's going to be more persecution. The saints are going to be killed.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's like, well, we already went through all of this, and we're going to go through more. So.
Yeah, we see that the cycle will continue, that there will be persecution, there will be judgment of the people throughout. There's going to be warring enemies coming through, and the persecution's not done. It's not done, but there will be an end to it. Miss Kay.
Did we decide who the prince of princes is in verse 25?
I think we talked a little bit about it last week, but I'll open up. Who would the prince of princes be then at this time? If we were to make a connection. Verse 25, that by his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. Who would the prince of princes be? Aaron?
I think it represents the leader of the Jewish people at that time.
Could be.
And within the context of the temple and the desecration of the temple, most likely the high priest.
Okay.
As the spiritual leader of the Jews.
Yeah, so a representation of the high priest that was leading the people at the time, the representative of God to the people at the time that the temple would be desecrated in 167? Absolutely. What else? Could we say it another way? God himself. Isn't that what he's doing? He's rising up against the God of the Jewish people, of the Israelite nation, and conquering his temple to try to exert his dominance and say, I'm better than your God? Okay, and he even goes so far as to put the figure of Jupiter in the temple. Ida?
Weren't God's servants, like angels, also described as princes?
Yes.
In this book.
But the idea, it's the prince of princes.
Right,
So it's the ruler of the rulers.
right.
So who would that be?
Michael, Gabriel?
Okay. I'm going to say I probably would not go there as much. Now, I'm not saying it totally breaks the model, but Michael and Gabriel are mentioned by name in various points. I mean, Gabriel is actually doing some of the talking. Verse 16 tells us that Gabriel's there. It tells us that Michael, the archangel, as we get into chapter 10, we'll see Michael being represented there. But to be the prince of princes, to me, exudes that you have the ultimate authority in some way, that you are the top dog, and Michael doesn't have that. He's still under the power of God. So I probably wouldn't go there, although, again, I don't think it breaks the model, because he'd be the greatest one that we know by name of the angels. Thoughts on that? Questions?
Well, no matter who it is, whether it's one of God's special angels or him himself, it's the same thing.
Good. Yeah. So no matter whether it is Michael or it's God himself or the high priest or however you look at it, it's still the same thing because it comes to the same outcome, which is what? He dies, the end comes to the indignation, and the restoration happens. That all things are conquered in the end. That God will have that control. By his hand, everything will be set back in order. Mark.
It's just that repeating message in all of this. When he stipulates the host, this is a heaven thing. It's not, and you know, here's God's angel battling people on earth. It's all fascinating to read. I don't know that we can completely understand it. I think ultimately this is God again, which is the main message in my mind of Daniel, is God over everything.
Yes.
He's in power. He has ultimate dominion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the major takeaways from this is seeing God's hand in all of it. Now I realized as I was reflecting back, we never looked at chapter 7's organization and looked at its chiastic structure, and we need to go over chapter 8. We don't have the time this morning to do that, so I'm prepping you. Look at chapter 7 and chapter 8 again, and look for the repeating structure. Remember where the first part of the story matches the last part, and see if you can try to figure out what the central focus of chapter 7 and the central focus of chapter 8 are. That'll be where we pick up next week before going into chapter 9, because I don't want us to miss out on those designs. All right, Steve has another question or comment, and then I think, depending on time, did I see your hand, Barry? Okay. Let's get a microphone if we could, Steve. That's okay.
This isn't intended to be insulting or anything, but I give this to Solomon. And where is it? Chapter 3. There is a time for this. There is a time for that. And the guys, I know that's going to sound kind of, it's a strange thing to jump in, but I think, Solomon was given. He wanted something. He may have been the only guy who had it. Anyway, I'll talk individual if you want an idea.
Well, I think to your point, Steve, what you point out is the fact that what the author of Ecclesiastes ultimately comes to is God is in control. And there is a time for everything. And there is that God's timing will dictate when these things happen. We're going to have Barry here. And so in line with this is Daniel having to reason through, despite not understanding it, and despite the angels not knowing how long, and these other ones that don't quite understand what's going on, he can still find peace knowing that God's hand is controlling it all. Barry, and then I think we're done.
Well, in verse 17, it has this term that, O Son of Man, understand that the vision is for the time of the end. And there are many people who are taught that any time in the Bible you see the term like the time of the end or the last days, that sort of language is always talking about Jesus' second coming.
Yeah.
And it just simply isn't.
Yeah.
That kind of rigid interpretation will just lead you down all kinds of erroneous roads.
Yeah.
And those terms are used for various events and not to just the end of the world.
Yeah, and as we see here, it clearly lines out to the restoration of the temple at the time of the Maccabean revolt in 164. Now, if you wanted to tie it to Christ, take the spiritual side of this. The people have become so broken that they've lost access to the temple. And even the physical temple, as they restore it, they end up desecrating it themselves and ruining the relationship with God. So how long will it be till this happens? Well, O Son of Man, the vision is for the time of the end. Well, the end of the temple's purpose would come at the time of Christ, and he would restore a relationship to God that would be beyond anything that could be seen in the physical temple. I don't think that's what the initial description is here, but there is that tie that when Christ comes and is called the Son of Man, he is fulfilling on a different layer than what this refers to. So you could tie it to Jesus coming the first time and restoring a relationship to God, no longer being destroyed by the wickedness of man. All right? So think about that. We can talk about that some more next week as we go over the chart, and we'll go from there. Appreciate your comments and attention.